has said. I want to say a few words in Korean about our guest speaker this morning. 우리 손성원 박사는 지금 현재 캘리포니아 스테이트 유니버시티 채널 아일랜드의 석좌 교수로 스미스 프로페서 인 이코노믹스를 로서 지금 거기서 티칭을 하고 있습니다. 우리 손성원 박사는 과거에도 몇 번 우리 이 디스팅귀시 렉처 포럼에서 스피치를 한 적이 있기 때문에 아마 여러분들 만나보신 분들이 대부분이고, 그렇지 않아도 또 다른 계제에 아마 손 박사에 대해서 잘 아시리라고 믿습니다. 우리 손성원 교수는 그야말로 상아탑에만 묻혀있는 이런 소위 암추어 이코노미스트가 아닙니다. 티칭도 하면서 미국의 최대 은행 중에 하나였던 웰스파고 은행의 CEO도 했고, 또 많은 미국의 유명한 회사의 보드 멤버로서도 직접 경영에 자문도 하고, 또 직접 또 그 외에 금융회사의 CEO나 체어맨을 한 이런 그야말로 아주 액티브한 리얼 월드 이코노미스트입니다. 그리고 특히 손성원 박사는 이코노믹 포캐스팅에 아주 누구보다도 아주 정평이 있는 그러한 경제학자입니다. 월스트리트 저널에서도 우리 손성원 박사를 one of the best economic forecaster로 이야기한 적이 여러 번 있고, 또 우리 손성원 박사는 우리 타임 매거진의 보드 오브 이코노미스트에서도 또 여러 가지 타임 매거진을 위해서 자문도 하고, 이런 그야말로 리얼 월드 이코노믹 프로블럼을 다루는 데 있어서 누구보다도 이 정평이 있는 이러한 교수입니다. 우리나라에도 그동안 종종 오는 기회가 있었고, 앞에서 말씀드린 바와 같이 이 바로 디스팅귀시 렉처 포럼에서도 몇 번 이야기를 한 적이 있습니다만은, 이번에도 다른 오케이전으로 서울에 잠깐 왔다가 아마 내일 또 미국으로 돌아가는 것 같습니다만은, 이왕 서울에 왔기 때문에 여기서 최근에 특히 미국 경제, 사실은 지금 현재 세계경제 전체 중에서 아주 그래도 브라이트 스팟을 찾으려면은 현재 미국 경제가 를 꼽을 수가 있습니다. 선진국 경제, 과거는 리먼 브라더스 뱅크럽시 이후에 이머징 이코노미에 상당한 역할을 했었는데, 특히 브릭스를 중심으로 한 그런 이머징 이코노미들이 상당한 역할을 했지만은, 최근에 와서는 어드밴스드 이코노미가 상당한 역할을 해주고 있고, 그 중에서 미국이 가장 큰 역할을 하고 있습니다. 그래서 오늘 이 미국 경제와 특히 브릭스에 대해서 아마 좋은 말씀을 해 주실 걸로 기대를 합니다. 그러면 이것으로서 간단하게 소개 말씀을 드리겠습니다. Please join me in thanking Dr. Song.
여러분 안녕하십니까? 이걸 설치하는 동안에 내가 잠깐 내 스피치에 대해서 한국말로 좀 서마리를 해드리겠습니다. 그리고 이제 스피치는 영어로 하겠습니다. 저는 한국에서 고등학교만 졸업하고 미국으로 가서 전문 영어는 다 영어로 배웠기 때문에 영어로 하는 게 좀 쉬워서 저는 그렇게 하겠습니다. 그걸 양해해 주시기 바랍니다. 간단히 말씀을 드리면은, 저는 이제 세계 경제가 아마 스태그네이션은 아니지만은 그쪽으로 가지 않나, 그렇게 지금 걱정을 하고 있습니다. 여러 가지가 있는데 그 여러 가지 이유를 오늘 아침에 조금 이제 말씀드릴 겁니다. 그러니까 역사부터, 그렇지 않으면 이제 생산력, 또 데모그래픽스, 여러 가지를 보면은 세계 경제가 조금 둔화가 되지 않나, 그렇게 생각합니다. 그건 미국만 아니고 유럽, 일본, 한국, 세계 경제가 다 그렇게 됩니다. 세계 경제를 보면은 큰 바다와 같은데 나라는 배 한 척입니다. 미국이든지 한국이든지 배 한 척이니까 세계 경제 흐름이 한쪽으로 가면은 그쪽으로 다들 가기가 마련입니다. 그런데 이제 그런 상황에서 그러면은 이제 어떻게 해야 되느냐? 오늘 제가 말씀드릴 것은 내가 이제 최근에 지난달에 책을 하나 써가지고 이게 발간했는데 이게 뉴 이코노미라고 그러니까 미래 경제라고 그러죠. 그게 여기에 이제 다 많이 들어가 있는데 거기에서 이게 내 책에 쓴 이제 주 목적은 뭐냐 그러면은 이게 세계 경제가 좀 둔화가 된다. 이제 그게 주 목적이 아니고 그건 fait accompli 그렇게 쓴다고 가정을 하면은 그러면 한국은 어떻게 해야 되느냐, 미국은 어떻게 해야 되느냐. 또 이제 개인 회사들 내가 말 기업을 운영한다고 그러면 나는 어떻게 해야 되느냐, 무슨 방법을 이제 써야 되느냐. 결과적으로 파이를 보게 되면 이제 파이가 옛날에는 계속 자랐는데 그렇기 때문에 everyone can have more. 그렇지만 이게 파이가 크지 않으면은 이게 market share, 시장 점유율 그게 이제 경쟁이 되는 거죠. 그러면은 내가 회사로서, 내가 나라로, 내가 개인으로서 뭘 어떻게 해야 시장 점유율을 더 많이 가져갈 수가 있는가 그런 거에 대해서 말씀을 드리려고 합니다. 그래서 이제 그게 the main gist, the purpose of my talk this morning, and so let me go through them fairly quickly from BRICS to America. So first of all, let me talk about why we will have a slow economic growth globally, and then when we look at the global economy, we are running into a tipping point. As I pointed out, you as a nation, you as a company, you as an individual, what can you do about it? In my book, I talk about why economic growth around the globe will slow. There are many reasons for that, but this morning I want to talk about just two, history and productivity, and then you'll have to buy the book to read the rest, okay? If you look at economic history, why we go into a recession matters a great deal. Let me give you three specific examples. In 1947 in the United States, we had the so-called railroad crisis. In those days, America was building railroads to go west. A lot of the money actually in those days came from Europe. And then when money did not come from Europe, people didn't get credit. They couldn't build railroads. For a while, the money was coming from Europe, but it stopped. And that turned into a financial panic. People couldn't borrow. Those who borrowed, they couldn't pay back. And as a result, we had quite a bit of a problem. Even worse, in those days, railroads, they sold shares, stocks on installments. And this was the first historical example of selling something on installment in 1847. When people bought railroad shares on installments, they assumed that prices will go up and up and up. That's easy. When prices go up, I'll just, pay off the loan with higher prices. That didn't happen. So we had a financial panic. The problem was, back then, government officials didn't know why the problem was occurring. They didn't know what was happening. And number two, of course, they didn't know what to do about it. So that went on for a while. The ensuing economic condition, recovery, was lengthy, very painful. The same thing in 1907. We had a financial panic. The government officials, again, didn't know what was happening, didn't know what to do about it. And so eventually they decided to establish the Federal Reserve System in 1913. But that was a problem. And you can see during the Great Depression, the ensuing economic recovery was very lengthy and then very painful. The point is that when economic downturn occurs for other reasons, then the ensuing recovery can be pretty fast. The snapback can be pretty quick. On the other hand, if the cause of an economic recession downturn is financial, it takes a long time for the economy to recover. Finance is like blood in our system. If your blood is spoiled, poisoned, it's going to take a while to clean out. And so that's what was happening, and then to some extent, that is what is happening today. The cause of the economic problems we have today, that is the Great Recession caused by the financial crisis in 2007 to 2008. And so that is one of the reasons why I say we are talking about probably lengthy, sluggish economic growth for some time to come. The second reason why I say long-term economic growth is not going to be all that spectacular and not exciting this time around is productivity. Well, we all know what we mean by productivity. You know, if you ask me what is the one single most important word in economics, I would say productivity, because that is our standard of living. How well you live depends on your productivity. Productivity goes up, you live better. Productivity goes down, well, you don't live as well. You know, when I was teaching economics 101, I used to talk about a Swedish factory, a cheese factory, and this is a true story. You know, there was a cheese factory in Sweden which had operated for about 700 years. What was interesting about that cheese factory was the fact that they kept meticulous records of production. And also, they did not increase the number of employees over those 700 years. It was kept at 7 people. And also, they claimed that technology of a cheese production at that factory didn't change at all. But during that 700-year period, if you look at their records, the cheese production was same technology and then same number of people, went up about 500%. That is productivity. When productivity goes up, you can have more, you can live better, your standard of living goes up, and so that's productivity. If you look at this chart here, this tells you growth in GDP real per capita from 1300 to 2000 to 2100. You can see from 1300 for about 500 years, GDP per capita didn't go anywhere, essentially sideways. And then it shut up. You see that blue line and the red line, it shut up, and then in recent years, it is going up, but at a slower rate. Or, let me put it this way. This is what it looks like. If you look at the chart that I just showed you, we saw productivity gains. It took 500 years for productivity gains to double, or standard of living to double. And then it took 100 years from 1800 to roughly 1920s or so to double standard of living again. And then in the 20th century, it took about 35 years to double. But what's happening is that in 21st century, it is taking more than 35 years. Productivity gains are rising, but going up at a slow rate. And so that's one of the concerns that we have. Are we reversing the continuous acceleration in productivity gains? We all know about steam engines, the textiles and cotton spinning and railroads and etc. from 1750 to 1830. Innovations and inventions take time, and it did. So many of these inventions did not really bear fruit until later, and this is so-called the golden age of productivity gains, from 1870 to 1920. We had indoor plumbing. You know, many economists say that, and I'm one of them, of all the significant inventions we've had in economic history, probably the most significant invention we had was indoor plumbing. When we did not have indoor plumbing, men and women had to go out to fetch water every single day, 3-4 times a day, spend, you know, thousands of hours a year. And not only that, it was dirty. Infant mortality rate was very high. People were getting sick. In 1870, the average life expectancy was 47 years. And today, of course, we're talking about something in the mid-80s. That's in part because of indoor plumbing. Indoor plumbing did wonders for productivity and then, of course, our health. Automobile also was very important. In the olden days, we had farms and the cities. People couldn't get back and forth very easily. Why? Because they didn't have good mode of transportation. When the automobile came, people from rural areas could go to cities, and then from the cities they could go to rural areas. We had labor mobility. You know, labor mobility is very important in promoting economic growth and productivity. Labor mobility. Not only that, people from rural areas went to urban areas, and they bought apartments, and they bought the kitchen appliances, they bought telephones, and they bought, you know, a lot of, stuff in their houses. And as a result, consumption went up, and that, of course, helped economic growth. We know about electricity to run air conditioning, water, heater, elevators, and etc. So this is so-called the golden age. About 70% of all the inventions in economic history came during this period, so-called the golden age, between 1870 and then 1920. Of course, many of those are spin-offs from earlier inventions. As I said, the fruits of inventions take time. When we come to a more modern age, 1960 to date, of course, we've had computers and the internet and the smartphones. But if you look at the productivity gains, so this is more of a recent gains in productivity. You can see productivity gains are occurring, but at a much slower rate. So a lot of people say, now, how is that possible? After all, we have smartphones, HD TVs, and all these electronic computer gadgets and satellites, and et cetera. Productivity gains should be accelerating, going sky high. And this chart from the U.S. Commerce Department, Bureau of Labor Statistics, says productivity gains are actually slowing. And that's one of the reasons why I said earlier, you know, it used to be every 35 years we were able to double our standard of living. Well, we're not doing that. It's now taking more than 35 years. Why? Well, one of the reasons is when you talk about smartphones and HD TVs, they don't really raise productivity that much. It is fun to have it. It is more pleasant to have it. It's enjoyable to watch TV on HD. And smartphones, you can play music and do all kinds of things, but it does not save time. If anything, I suppose one could argue that we are wasting a lot of time because of all these gadgets, right? It does not raise productivity. So that is one of the reasons why productivity gains are slowing. Now, if you look at, long-term economic history, a major new economic invention occurs about every 60 to 70 years, see? And some people say that we are coming to the tail end of the computer, the internet revolution. Maybe in 5, 10, 15 years, who knows? There will be a new major revolution in technology. And usually it did historically. But that's not going to affect you and me. When a new revolution in technology comes, that will affect our children and grandchildren, not you and me. Why? Because it takes a long time for the fruits of the invention to bear fruits, as I pointed out earlier. So I guess the point, again one of the main reasons why I'm saying the economic growth around the world will slow down significantly, many reasons for that, but one of the main reasons is, of course, productivity gains. Now, when you look at the economies around the world, abstracting away from these global issues that I just talked about, I would say we are into a tipping point. A few years ago, right after the Great Recession, we talked about how developing economies were doing so well. They were the locomotives. They were pulling the advanced nations forward and upward. Well, today, that situation is changing slightly. The economic momentum, economic gravity is changing from emerging markets to developed markets. United States, Japan, Europe. We seem to be doing a little bit better than we did before. Whereas if you look at developing nations from Brazil to India, well, they're having lots of problems. Instead of talking about BRIC, of course, we all know we're talking about so-called the Fragile Five. You could be Fragile 6, Fragile 10, but these are representatives. Turkey, India, Indonesia, Brazil, and South Africa, and the list can go on and on and on. And if you look at the Asian economic miracle, a lot of it was based on credit expansion. You see what's been happening to monetary base, which is used to make money supply. And the red line that you see on the bottom, that is the U.S. Federal Reserve. We all know Federal Reserve has engaged in a number of rounds of so-called quantitative easing. And that was a major reason why the U.S. economy has been able to do better now. But when you look at the Asia's 10 countries' monetary base, you can see it's been going up at a faster pace. And you cannot obviously rely on credit indefinitely, and so that's one of the reasons. If you look at some of the countries, here's the Asia's credit and economic growth. The red bar, those are from 2005 to 2007. And then gray bar, that's 2013. You see, for example, China, heavily dependent upon credit expansion. Malaysia, Thailand, heavily dependent upon credit expansion. Well, you can only do it for so long. You cannot do it indefinitely, and so that, I think, is one of the reasons. If you look at the Asia's exports, it's not doing as well. You see, this is a rate of change, percent increase of exports from previous year. Japan, China, Taiwan, and Korea. Exports are going up, but not all that rapidly. The rate of increase has slowed quite a bit. Now, why is that? Well, many reasons, but let's look at the United States. If you look at the United States, U.S. economic growth has been somewhat slower than anticipated. No one is expecting a spectacular surge in economic activities in the United States. Also, in the United States, we are spending a lot of money on so-called capital spending. But a lot of it is related to oil and gas. And we do not really import a lot from overseas to produce oil and gas. If anything, we export oil and gas drilling equipment. Consumers are still in the process of paying down debt. They were very highly leveraged during the Great Recession. Now they are trying to put their balance sheet, their house back in order. And then, of course, Asia now is very expensive, so that rather than producing in China, people are going to Mexico and elsewhere to buy what they want. When you look at the emerging market nations, so there are general economic problems as well. Current account deficits, a fancy term for nations' cash flow, current account deficits are pretty high. You look at Brazil, for example. You know, they've always had current account deficits. But during good times, a lot of money came in, thanks in part because of quantitative easing from the U.S. and then other countries. And it covered up, it paid for a lot of red ink in current account deficits. Now that may not be the case. Money is not coming in as readily as it used to. It is not covering the current account deficits as they had before. So that's one of the problems. And also, they've got chronic inflation, fairly high long-term inflation, and then these countries are heavily dependent upon commodities. For example, China used to buy a lot of commodities from Brazil, Indonesia, for example. Indonesia, Brazil, Australia, even Canada, they benefited a great deal from Chinese purchases of commodities. But as I will talk about in a minute, China is slowing economic growth. They're not buying as much commodities as they used to. So we used to talk about BRIC. BRIC meant, this is where the action was. This is the exciting place. And they even had the BRIC economic summits. Well, today I would say the BRIC is falling apart. If I had to do it, I would get rid of B, I would get rid of R, I would get rid of I. I would just have a C, see? It would be just a C, not BRIC. And so let's talk about China. Clearly, if there is a locomotive pulling the world economy today, it is not the U.S., it is not Europe, it's not Korea, it's not Japan, it still is China. And if China loses its status as a locomotive, then the global economy is in trouble. Well, one of the reasons why Chinese economy is slowing, as you know, is because that's how the government wants it, see? And what Chinese government wants, they get it, and I think for good reasons. They don't want to pollute air, they want to export at the expense of health and, environment. And so they are saying that we want quality, not quantity. Composition of economic growth is far more important than quantity of economic growth. And I think that is really right in the right direction because many economists, including myself, have been saying for years, China, you cannot be producing goods like this and export and export and export. You need to improve the quality of your production, quality of your life. And the new leadership in Beijing, they are doing that. And I applaud them for that. But having said that, if you look at China's economic growth, between 1980 to 2011, it averaged 10%. In some of the quarters, it was growing at 14, 13% at an annual rate. Well, we're not going to see that anymore. Why? Because, again, in part, the government doesn't want it that way. From 2012 to 2014, it grew 7.6%. So economic growth rate has slowed dramatically, significantly, and I think, to me, that is going in the right direction. Does that mean China will have a hard landing? If China were to have a hard landing, that would have a significant impact on the Korean economy, the U.S. economy, and the global economy. See, after all, China has been the fastest growing market for U.S. exports. The biggest market for Korea is, of course, China. 24% of Korea's exports go to China. The fastest growing market for Mercedes-Benz, Callaway Golf, they're all in China. About 1/3 of all the Swiss luxury watches they were sold in China. So what happens if Chinese economic growth slows precipitously? Well, here you see two lines. The blue line, that is year-over-year economic growth, which tends to be a bit more stable. The dotted red line that you see, that is the quarter-to-quarter change in economic growth, which tends to be more volatile. The point I'm trying to make is that every time you hit one of those valleys, you see the three circles. So you have economic growth on a quarterly basis goes down significantly. And the Chinese government, they engage in some sort of an economic stimulus. And they did that again and again and again. And then when they do that, economic growth on a quarter-to-quarter basis, it picks up, accelerates. But if we look at the more stable, longer term, year-over-year change in economic growth, I'm saying that we will have a soft landing, not a hard landing, and that's a good news for the global economy. You see, from 13 to 14% economic growth that they used to enjoy. Now we're talking about something in the range of 7.5% to 8% or even lower. And that's what the government wants. As far as global economic implications are concerned, it is fairly significant, especially if you are exporting commodities. You can see 66% of global iron ore consumption is done in China. China consumes 46% of all the copper produced in the world, 18% of all the wheat produced in the world. So that if you're exporting commodities such as copper, wheat, and iron ore, what happens in China does make a great deal of difference. You know, I go to China once or twice a year, and every time I go to China, and I worry, but fortunately my worries have not turned into disasters, but China does have some risks. And let's talk about three of them very quickly. Number one is debt. Number two is a real estate bubble. And number three, cost. We all know about China's debt as a percent of GDP, right? And a lot of debt is really residing at the state and local governments. A few years ago when I was in Beijing, I was talking to a friend of mine at the Central Bank of China. He was telling me that at the time, 88 cities, not 8, but 88 cities were building subway systems. And I said, why do you need so many subway systems? And then essentially, well, my next door neighbor city is going to have a subway system. I'm going to have one too. So I said, well, how do you finance it? Well, that's easy. You go to a government-owned bank and you borrow. So I said, well, how do you pay it back? And he said, well, it's a government-owned bank. You don't have to pay it back. See? So, that's the kind of a mentality they had. So they've got, pretty significant national debt. Here's a bridge called the Guizhou Bridge, and then this is a province called the Guizhou. And to build this bridge, it costs almost $1 billion. This, poor interior province in China, should they have spent about $1 billion building this bridge? I don't think they should have, but that's what they did. And again, who's got the debt? Well, the government does, and a lot of that money came from the local government-owned banks. Real estate. If you look at China's house prices from Beijing, Shanghai, Shenzhen to other medium-sized cities, they are going up at a slow rate. It certainly has peaked, crested. In some cities, prices are actually declining. In the United States, there's a TV station, CBS TV station. Not a long time ago, they did a story on China, so-called the Ghost City. And here's the picture they took. And then they did a half-an-hour program on the ghost cities in China. Not only this one, but other one, but this was the largest one. When you look at the city, you can see it's a beautiful city, right? Okay, beautiful city. The problem is not a single individual lives in it. See, not even a dog, not even a cat. No one's living there. See, so someone decided that we are going to build. If we build, the people will come. Well, they didn't come. See. And so that's part of the problem. And then, this is not only one city we are talking about. There are many cities like that around China, and all of these cities are built on credit. The third concern that I have about China is cost. Not a long time ago, many Korean, American, European firms went to China. Why? Because cost of production was low, right? Not anymore today. You see manufacturing wages. China has been going up rapidly. Mexico is a lot more competitive. More and more American firms are now going to Mexico. Why go to China? Well, if you look at labor cost, including benefits, China versus Mexico, you can see as of 2012, we crossed a line. Today, actually, China is more expensive than Mexico in manufacturing labor costs. And by 2015, I project that there will be a significant disadvantage for China compared to Mexico. Also, if you look at the distance from China to the United States, to Chicago, for example, it takes 4 months to ship goods from China to Chicago by ship and by rail. But if you produce in Mexico, it takes 4 days or even less, see? And if you ship it by airplane, you can get there in 4 hours, not 4 days. So you can see it has a significant distance advantage as well. But I guess going back to the point about tipping point. Does that mean that we should get out of developing nations, food production and investments and et cetera? I say, heck no. Still, developing nations, they are growing faster than the developed nations. This is one place that you want to be. But again, tipping point has been reached. We need to continue to pay attention to developing nations no matter what you do. Importing, exporting, investing. They've got faster economic growth. If you look at the stock market capitalization, they are growing faster than United States and Europe. And then also you can get much higher returns. If you go to South Africa today, if you go to Taiwan, actually you can get double-digit rates of return. And then, of course, diversification of your portfolio, that's another reason. But when we talk about this tipping point from BRICS, developing nations, to developed nations, advanced nations, we know Japan is doing better. Europe is coming out of a recession, even though no one is very excited about the prospects in the future. I would still say today the United States is one of the happier places to be in terms of economic growth. The prospects are pretty good. Here you see all the jobs we have lost during the Great Recession. And now we are almost back to where we were. So you can see, going back to what I said, if the cause of an economic downturn is financial, like it was during the Great Recession, it takes a long time for the economy to recover. The ensuing recovery is gradual and slow, and sometimes very painful, and that's what we've been seeing, but now at least we are back. When we look at economic growth in 2014 and 2015, we expect some acceleration, but nothing to write home about. You know, I remember when I was economist in the White House, one of my jobs at the time was computing potential economic growth rates for the U.S. economy. I mean, this is many years ago, over 100 years ago probably, so I'm not going to tell you what year. But, you know, back then we were talking about potential economic growth rates for the United States at about 3.5%. I mean, today the potential economic growth rates are probably, some people say 2%, 2.5%, but, you know, no one is talking about anything approaching 3%. So potential economic growth rate for the U.S. has slowed quite a bit. And then also, you know, that has also been true when you look at Korea. You know, Korea's economic potential growth rate has slowed, I think, from about 4% to something around 3%. And let me tell you how much of a difference it makes. If you could grow the economy at 4%, it takes about 20 years to double your standard of living. If the economy were to grow 3% per year as opposed to 4%, it will take 70 years to double your standard of living. So you can see 1% makes a lot of difference. 1% generates a lot of revenues. You can pay for a lot of budget deficits. If we can get the U.S. economy to grow by 1% more, we can take care of all the budget deficit problems, see? And then we can spend money here and there and everywhere. But economic growth, that's the key, just 1%. So one thing good about this economic growth in the United States is the fact that it's growing slowly, at a sluggish pace. And when it does, generally it goes on for a long time. Today, you can see the current expansion beginning June 2009. It is about 58 months old, and then hopefully this will go on for a while. And the longest one, as you can see, went on for 120 months during the technology boom in 1991 and then 2001. So I don't know if we will match that, but I'm hoping that this economy will be growing more rapidly, will be growing at a good pace for quite some time. But some people worry about already a recession. I don't think a recession is in the cards. But one of the reasons why people worry about a recession is because of the central bank, the Federal Reserve. Here you see all the recessions and you see all the causes. The number one cause was mistake on the part of the Federal Reserve. They overdid it. They tightened it too early, too fast, too soon. And then you can see almost 2/3 of economic recessions were caused by the U.S. Federal Reserve. Will they do that again? Well, here is the consensus from the Federal Open Market Committee of the Central Bank. And here you have 3 scenarios, but if you look at the middle one, the blue one, it essentially says, well, they will raise interest rate sometime mid-2015, a year from now, and then they will start raising the rates slowly and gradually. I tend to disagree, even though I'm obviously not at the Federal Reserve, and given my global economic outlook, kind of a sluggish economic outlook, I don't think inflation is a problem. To me, deflation is more of a problem. In this global economic environment, I don't think the central bank, the Federal Reserve, should be raising the interest rate too soon. I'd rather see them raise interest rates later rather than sooner, see? And then so my expectation is that rates are going to go up sooner or later, but maybe June 2015, as the consensus says, that may not be the case. It might be later than that. But if you look at historical pattern, this is what it looks like. The Fed begins tightening. It takes about 18 months for the stock market S&P 500 to peak. And then S&P 500, often that is a leading economic indicator that causes an economic recession. So if you look at the whole span, it's about 28 months. And then so, you know, Federal Reserve has now begun to tighten yet. So we've got some, well, good, exciting opportunities ahead of us. You see the Federal Reserve holdings of as a percent of GDP. You know, a lot of people are saying that, you know, sooner or later this is going to create a lot of inflation. I mean, it's, you know, fait accompli. It's a handwriting on the wall, see? You know, Milton Friedman said so. When you create money supply, sooner or later that leads to more inflation. Well, you know, obviously the velocity, so-called, has to go up. I don't want to get into those technical discussions, but if you look at history, you know, you see in the 1940s and 1950s, the Federal Reserve holdings of government bond as a percent of GDP was very high. Did that cause inflation? No. In the 1950s and 60s, we had virtually no inflation. So simply because the Federal Reserve, the central bank, produces a lot of liquidity, does not mean that that necessarily leads to more inflation right away. You know, I don't think that will be the case this time around. I mean, you know, America, as I pointed out, is one of the better economies that we have right now. And there are many reasons, economic, institutional, human capital, and location. And then let me just run through these very quickly. The economic size does matter because it gives you variety. It gives you diversification. It gives you economies of scale. Clearly, the United States economy is one of the largest economies. Also, the United States is now Saudi America. We are producing more energy than Saudi Arabia and Russia. And that has a number of advantages. First of all, obviously, we don't have to import oil as much. That means it helps our balance of trade. Politically, we don't have to depend on the volatile Middle East, so reduces uncertainties. Also, energy goes into the production of everything. For example, if you look at 1,000 cubic feet of natural gas, in the United States, it's about $4 today. If you went to Japan, it is $16. If you went to Europe, it would be about $18. So you are making cars. GM and Ford, they are making cars. And Mercedes-Benz and then Volkswagen, they are making cars. Volkswagen and Mercedes-Benz, they are paying $16 to $18 per 1,000 cubic feet of natural gas. GM and Ford, they are paying only $4. You can see tremendous cost advantage that American companies have because of the energy availability. Also, manufacturing that is coming back to America. A lot of manufacturing went overseas to China because back then it required a lot of hand, right? See? A lot of labor. But today, machines can do that. Computers can do that. We got softwares to do that. So you are bringing them back. And here are a number of companies coming back to the U.S. These are the U.S. companies. And here's a factory in Kentucky. GE brought back this plant from China. They are making water heaters. You see, there aren't too many people. Why? Because these water heaters are being built not by humans, but by machines, by software, see, by robots. And so that's why they can come back to the U.S. Not only GE and other American firms, but foreign firms are coming back as well. GE, Siemens, and then Toyota, for example. If you look at manufacturing productivity, you can see the United States has the highest manufacturing productivity, U.S., Germany, and Japan. And then so not only that, as I pointed out, the cost of energy, natural gas, is much lower. And I'm not going to go through all the details, but this essentially shows you that the relative manufacturing cost, China, U.S., Germany, France, and Japan, United States has advantages. Number one, people's productivity is higher, and number two, energy costs are higher, so that helps manufacturing. Geographical location. You know, when you look at Germany, French, and Polish, you know, they fight and they have wars and they hit each other over the history. We do the same thing in Asia, right? Korea, Japan, and China, we had wars and so, you know, they hurt each other, etc. But if you look at the United States, on the left-hand side, there is the Pacific Ocean. On the right-hand side, there is Atlantic Ocean. Well, no one's going to come over, see, right? It's just too big. And on the northern side, we've got Canada, and the southern side, we've got Mexico. So we have a pretty good relationship with Mexico and Canada. So, it's a pretty good geographic location, and that is important. And also, the United States has what I call the Wimbledon effect. You know about Wimbledon, tennis match, right? Once a year, they have a tennis match. But very rarely, actually, 2003 and 2004 was an exception. Very rarely, if ever, a English guy wins the Wimbledon match. But the key is not the fact that a British guy or English guy wins a Wimbledon match. The key is the fact that it is taking place in England. See, that's what it is important. So England, they get all the notoriety, all the publicity, and all the goodwill, see, because of a Wimbledon match. Millions and tens of millions of people from Korea to America to, Europe, they watch the Wimbledon match. Again, England, they benefit because of that. A good example of the Wimbledon effect is the Silicon Valley. About 35% of all the talents in Silicon Valley, they are from overseas. Chinese, the Koreans, and the Japanese and Indians, and etc. See, if you go to Wall Street, that's another Wimbledon effect. 30% of all the talents in Wall Street, they are from overseas. And if you go to London Financial District, the same thing. 35% they are from overseas. What Silicon Valley, Wall Street, and London Financial District, what they're doing is that they're taking all the good people from overseas and says, well, you are American, you are British, you are mine, see? And then, they take advantage of them, and then they do very well. Well, this Wimbledon effect, I think, is very important, and America has a lot of it, see? And now, one of the things we don't have in Korea is a Wimbledon effect. Again, I don't want to get into that, but, many foreigners, they say it is very hard to work in Korea. Koreans don't let you in. You feel very lonely. And then so many foreigners, they come to Korea. They end up, talking to other foreigners, but they can't really get inside of the Korean community, Korean culture. So a lot of them, they come and then they leave. So that's one of the main problems that I think America has, Wimbledon effect. If you look at Japan, Japan is doing a bit better, as you can see. Because of their massive quantitative easing, they talked about era 1, 2, and 3. And as you can see, inflation is going up. So now, whether this can be sustained or not, that remains to be seen. When you have higher inflation expectations, people are likely to buy more. If you think prices will go down, why would you want to buy things today? Because if you waited longer, it'll be cheaper. But you can see inflation rate is going up. Also, the real interest rate, the interest rate adjusted for inflation, that is falling, and that is good for the economy. That will give a stimulus to the economy. So it is moving in the right direction. The question, I guess, is this temporary, or will that be sustained? We will have to wait and see. The key is what Prime Minister Abe called the arrow 3, the third arrow, which is structural reforms. That's hard to do. And so far, there's very little evidence that he has really done anything significant, and so we will have to wait and see. It might be that we are seeing some positive things coming out of the Japanese economy, but printing money, that's easy. I mean, if you could simply fix all the economic problems by printing money, wouldn't that be wonderful? Well, it doesn't work that way, see? You've got to do some other tough things like the structural reforms. Europe, things are doing better, but economic growth in Europe is supposed to show some strength, not a lot, but a little bit. But again, the European economy will remain in doldrums for quite some time. And then so I'll just skip Russia. The point I guess I'm here trying to make is that when you look at the global economy, it is growing, not as rapidly, but again, the center of gravity is coming from developing nations to developed nations such as Japan, United States, and maybe even Europe. But as I said from the very beginning, the purpose of my book, this book, was not so much to really talk about slower economic growth rate. But the purpose of my book was, what do you do about it? See? What do you do about it? And so that's what I devoted much of my book about. I guess the point is that when you have the global economy not growing very rapidly, when your pie is growing, everyone can have more, right? But when the pie is not growing, as I claim it is the case, then what matters is really the market share. how do I get a bigger market share? I as a nation, how do I get a bigger market share? I as a company, how do I get a bigger market share? You as an individual, how do I get more income, bigger market share, see, in your company? So those are the things that we are talking about. Economists like to talk about productivity, as I have earlier, right? I talked about the Swedish cheese production, right? We like to count things. You produced 10 wheels of cheese. You produce 3 cars today. You produce 10 pairs of shoes. See? That's productivity. But, today people are saying, maybe that's not the right way to look at it. I make 5 items to you and says, well, which one would you like? You say, I don't want any of it. It doesn't really matter to me. See? What you produce doesn't interest me anymore. See? So economists are talking about not so much production, the counting the number of shoes or cars or whatever, but satisfaction. I am producing something, whatever that is, but are you satisfied? Will you buy it? See? Are you happy about it? See? So that's where the kind of a paradigm shift is occurring. And that is something called a co-creation. I went to Harvard Business School, but today if you went to Harvard Business School, Stanford Business School, they are teaching something called a co-creation. And this is a way to get after what I call that satisfaction. Now, this co-creation idea is really nothing new. The idea came from a toy company called Legos, a Danish company, which happens to be the most profitable toy company in the world today. When you give your children battery-operated toys, they play with it, the battery runs out, they throw it out, right? So you say, oh, here's a new battery, why don't you play with it more? They don't want to play with it anymore, they're bored. But you give them a box of Lego toys, what? They are very interested. They make things and then they get excited and then they do that, year after year after year. And so why? Because they are creating it, see? You're not giving it to them. They are creating it. That's why it's called a co-creation, see? You, the parents, and the toy company and children, they are creating together. That's called a co-creation. And that's why, well, the Lego, as I said, has become the most successful, profitable toy company in the world. If you go to Levi's, on the website, they claim that they've got 6,500 different combinations of jeans. You can make your own jeans by style, size, color, you name it. They've got it. See? Again, they are saying that here are 5 jeans. Which one do you want? And you will say, I don't want any of it. See? They are saying that instead, there are 6,500 combinations. You make it your own. You create it. See? Let's create it together. That's a co-creation. See? Okay? And then so more and more companies are doing that. A similar idea is so-called crowdsourcing. A couple of months ago, I was in Mexico City to give a speech, and then at night I was watching TV commercial. It was a Heineken beer commercial. And, it's in Mexican and Spanish, so I didn't understand it. But later on, I found out that that Heineken beer commercial was not produced by Heineken company, but a guy in the street of Mexico City. What Heineken did was they put an ad through the internet and says, we want some commercials for our company. So you put one together and then send it to us. If we like it, we'll run it. And that's exactly what they did. And that is called the crowdsourcing. See? And the American company called Procter & Gamble, before they make any new product or introduce any new brand, they announce it on the internet. We want your opinion. We are thinking about doing this. Would you like to participate? In the olden days, the people used to use the company used to call the so-called focus groups. Invite 5, 10, 20 people and then ask them, what do you think? Well, today you're talking about not 5 people, 10 people, but, 20 million people, 10,000 people. There are a lot of people sending messages to Procter & Gamble. This is what I want. I like this about it. I don't like about this, and etc. And then so that's a pretty standard procedure today. That is crowdsourcing. Get information from you. Because if you have an input, the chances are you are more likely to buy that because, you had an input. You are more likely to be satisfied. If you're more likely to be satisfied, you're more likely to pay higher prices. Therefore, your margins are higher. See? Okay? And so that's what's happening around the world. And here is a commercial on the Super Bowl. Now, let me ask you. This commercial was ran on Super Bowl, you know the Super Bowl in the U.S., right? Very expensive time, okay? And this was, again, crowdsourced. You know, the company didn't make it. One of the person in the street, they made it and then sent it to the company, and they decided to use it, and they ran it on the Super Bowl. Now tell me, what do you think they're selling? The baby? What are they selling? Huh? A camera called the GoPro, right? Now, do you know what a GoPro camera is? You know, if you watch TV, you can be surfing and then you wear your camera and then you can see all the actions, right? You could be skydiving and then you have a camera on your, lapel or on your head or something. You can all see that, see? Apparently this guy, the parent, he was wearing one of those wearable cameras here and then he was just, playing with his baby, essentially, see? And so they are saying that you can all, do all these things. Again, the point is that this was crowdsourced. And, I guess what I'm saying is that when you look at the global economic growth, really the slowdown is pretty inevitable. And and then, as I said, that's what I talked about in my book. And so I hope you have a chance to read my book. And then also, I have a lot of things about other issues about the economy in my website, drson.com. I have no commercials of any kind, so you can come and not worry about commercials. And so I hope you will be able to come and see me here. Again, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much for a very quick but highly insightful and illuminating survey of global economic terrain. Not only the current terrain, but I put this in historical perspective as well. In such a short span of time, Dr. Son summarized this global economic the picture so well and so insightfully. Now with this, we have time for interactions with you and Flo. And so if you have any questions or comments, yes, okay. Minister Kwon, please.
Thank you very much, Professor Son. I think this is one of the best lecture I had in many years. And one of the most impressed lesson I got from you is the Wimbledon effect. And Korea is lacking Wimbledon effect. In that sense, the Lone Star, which made huge amount of profit, $2 billion in 5 or 7 year period. And then many Korean press criticized the Lone Star hedge fund. Hedge fund is symbol of the evil capital because they made huge profit and run away, grab it and run away. But in some sense, I think they did make a lot of risk. They could have lost money. And then they criticize people who make money in Korea. But we make money from the States. So what is the impact of Lone Star to your theory of Wimbledon effect? Thank you.
Well, I don't really want to get into the legal issues because I'm not a lawyer, and then so. But I mean, as a general economic matter, I agree with you that we don't like foreign firms like hedge funds coming into the U.S. And hedge funds are really not here for a long time. They want to make quick bucks and leave. Essentially, they do that everywhere. And then so to some extent, that's what they were trying to do. But I think we have to also again abstracting away from Lone Star because I'm not an expert on legal matters, but I think Koreans are making money overseas. I mean, Samsung, for example, much of their revenues are coming from overseas. But that's okay. But if some other company come to Korea and then make huge amounts of money and take the money go elsewhere, that's not good for us. I think we should really, I think move away from that. And the Korean economy is too big. And then so, because we are, very big and a lot of investors are attracted to Korea, they should be allowed to make money. And then also, we should be allowed to go overseas, whether it's Europe, America, or China, and make money and do whatever we want with the money. So that's really the free economy. And then so I hope we move in that direction. I think, I mean, I can understand there are a lot of economic problems in Korea, and small to medium-sized companies, they complain that their sales are down, and then they can't get credit, and etc. And then they see a foreign company, and then take $2, $3, $4, $5 billion away from the Korean economy. You could see I could get upset, but again, we need to, I think, kind of get on a helicopter and look at a bigger picture. When you look at the bigger picture, I think really the free movement of money and capital, that is really the best way to go. I mean, just think about Korea today. Do you think Korea would be as prosperous as we are today if it weren't for the global economy? Certainly not. So we are one of the beneficiaries, one of the major beneficiaries of the global economy, and so I think we should really encourage globalization. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Kim. Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Son, for a very illuminating lecture. You talked about the slowdown of global growth, and you provided a very good historical perspective. One of the things I believe is happening is that the recent expanded growth came largely from the deficit spending of the governments. Particularly in most recent decades, U.S. was providing the deficit to the world for about close to the 1% growth, and you mentioned how important the 1% was, and I think the worldwide they were benefiting from that base, but now all the advanced economies has pretty much reached the end of the rope. That expansion cannot continue. So from now on, we really have to be honestly growing rather than the credit-based growing. Second point of you mentioned China's deliberate slowing down, which I believe is a very wise decision. They have now reached the point of the things like pollutions and racial disquiet, disequity throughout the society, so the non-economic factors, or at least non-directly productive economic factors, will compel the China to slow down. So I guess those two factors will have a very significant play in the future in terms of the not, again, seeing the kind of growth rate that we have been used to in the last few decades. Thank you.
Okay. Why don't you invite one more? Yes, there. Yeah, please. Yes.
저는 케미컬 에너지 투자자문의 차홍선이라고 합니다. 박사님 강의 잘 들었고요. 중국 연결해서 제가 하나 여쭤보려고 합니다. 박사님께서는 지금 현재 중국이 부채가 심하다, 그리고 부동산 가격이 버블이 심하다, 그리고 임금이 올라가고 있다 이렇게 말씀해 주셨는데, 그래서 흔히 보면 아시아가 97년도에 위기를 겪었고, 그 다음에 2008년도에 미국이 위기를 겪었고, 그 다음에 유럽으로 넘어갔지 않습니까? 그러면 과연 중국의 위기 가능성이 정말 몇 %로 보시는지. 근데 이렇게 있지 않습니까? 중국의 총 부채가 지금 이제 GDP 대비 한 240%고, 전국 부채가 65% 되면 가장 부채상으로 보면 안전한 국가가 중국인데, 그리고 성장하는 국가에서 부동산 가격은 올라가는 거는 당연지사인데, 왜 그렇게 이렇게 리스크가 많다고 보시는지 궁금합니다. 감사합니다.
네. 큰 픽처부터 보면 이제 중국 경제에는 문제가 많기는 많은데, 이게 그래도 이제 공산주의의 이제 controlled economy. 그래서 아까 말씀드린 바와 같이 what the government wants they get. 그러니까 이게 자유시장 경제 같은 한국이라든지 미국 같은 상황에서 지금 현재 그런 상황이 생겼으면요. 그러니까 지방정부가 부채가 굉장히 너무나 많고, 그랬다면 이제 버블이 깨지는데, 중국에서는 버블이 깨질 가능성이 없거든요. 왜냐하면 정부가 다 컨트롤하고 있기 때문에. 특히나 중앙정부에는 they control everything. Number two, they have lots of money. 그러니까 there are, four largest banks in China, the Bank of China, the Construction Bank, and Agricultural Bank, and the Bank of China, and etc. 어떤 사람들은 그래요. 그 은행들을 보면은, 부실 부채가 한 25% 정도 될 거라. 어떤 사람들은 그보다 더 많다고 그래요. 근데 그게 문제가 아닌 게, 왜 그러냐면, 우리도 한국에서 옛날에 그랬지 않습니까? 정책론이라고 그래가지고, 정부에서 너 이거 해. 그래, 그 문제가 되면 내가 개런티를 해줄게. 그렇게 하거든요. 그렇기 때문에 중앙정부에서는 컨트롤도 할 수가 있고 또 돈이 많기 때문에 문제가 있으면 결과적으로는 거기서 다 해결을 해준다는 거죠. So it's almost like a semi-government, implicit government guarantee. That's what they have. So that's why I don't think, there are problems, but it will lead to a breakup of the bubble. 근데 아까 말씀하신 것은, 그게 이제 왜 문제냐. 그러니까 그 문제가 뭐냐 그러면 중국 전체로 보면은 이제 중앙정부까지 다 합치면은 그 부채가 그렇게 많은 게 아닌데, 정부로 보면은 이게 부채들이 굉장히 많거든요. 그러니까 미국도 옛날에 그랬지 않습니까? 그 리만 사태. 그러니까 미국 전체적으로 봐면 리만 브라더 그것 때문에 서프라임 모기지 문제가 많이 생겼는데 그걸 그냥 정부에서 옛날에 그냥 컨트롤 해가지고 여기도 나눠주고 저기도 나눠주고 미국 경제 전체를 보면 그 리만 사태 그게 큰 문제가 아니었거든요. 그 문제가 왜 그러냐면 그게 it was concentrated in real estate. 그리고 또 정부가 가서 좀 베일아웃 하기도 했지만 다 해주지 않았지 않습니까? 그래가지고 이게 깨졌는데. 중국 경우에는 이제 그게 아니고 중국 경우에는 자기들이 그냥 다 해결해 줄 수가 있으니까 그렇기 때문에 제 생각에는 이게 문제가 they are in isolated areas, the state or local governments, for example, real estate not everywhere, but in some of the cities like ghost cities. 그러니까 그게 한국에나 그렇지 않으면 미국 가서 쓰면 그 버블이 깨져가지고 큰 문제가 여파가 생기는데 중국에는 그게 정부가 깨지도록 하지도 안 시켜주고, 깨진다고 해도 정부가 다 하게 컨트롤 해버리니까 크게 문제가 안 되는 거죠. 그렇기 때문에, I don't think they will have the kind of financial crisis that we had, in United States. So, it's a structural issue. They have a different structure of the economy. So that's why they can control it. 아까 말씀드린 바와 같이, 아까 내가 귀족였지 않습니까? 귀족 가난한 주인데, 그 레이셔를 보면요. 그게, compared to GDP of the state, as one of the highest debt ratios. 그러니까 그게 미국에 있으면, they would be allowed to go bankrupt. Recently Detroit went bankrupt. 그러니까 디트로이트가 중국에 있었으면 중앙정부에서 그렇게 베일아웃 해주는데 미국에서는 안 해주지 않습니까? 한국에서 가령 무슨 전라도나 그런 데에서 그런 일이 생겼다 그러면, they might go bankrupt. So, and then but not in China.
자, 또 누구 있습니까? I forgot to mention that Dr. Son, aside teaching and serving on boards of various corporations, he did serve the U.S. government as well in the White House. He was an economist there at the Council of Economic Advisors, and also he was a commissioner of Port of L.A., which is the largest port in the United States. And he was talking about some risk for Chinese economy, but he did said that there be a softer landing rather than hard landing. That's what he is talking about. And what do you mean by hard landing? I suppose Chinese growth rate go down below 7%, or maybe some people talk about 5%, but that won't happen. And maybe 7% or 7.5%, which is below 8%, which was not usual in the past, but that will happen because the government will be able to manage this serious risk.
그리고 잠깐 그러니까 아까 시간이 없어서 내가 이제 여러 가지 아까 말씀드린 바와 같이 이제 세계 경제가 조금 이제 둔화가 된다. 그러면 내가 회사로서 뭘 어떻게 해야 되느냐 이제 그에 대해서 말씀드렸는데, I just talked about the co-creation idea. That's one of the ways of doing it. I talked about the Wimbledon effect, taking advantage of the talents from overseas, and I suggested that Korea should do the same thing. The other thing I think is important for Korea is having more clusters. Again, as I said, I went to Harvard Business School, and one of my professors was Michael Porter. And he went on a sabbatical for a year. He traveled around the world. And he went to Switzerland, and then, in Switzerland, of course, Swiss chocolate is very famous. And then he asked himself a very good question. In Swiss, they don't even manufacture, they don't even produce chocolate. Now, how come Swiss has become the chocolate capital of the world, see? If you look at colored tiles, the tiles on the floor, he went to Italy. And if you want to get fancy colored tiles, you have to go to Italy. Now, his question was, why Italy? Why not Korea? Why not Japan? And why not, Romania? And then again, he came upon the idea of clusters, and then after he came back from his sabbatical, he wrote a book, and then he introduced this idea of clusters. If you go to Napa Valley in California, that is a cluster, meaning that not only are there wine producers, but there's actually a university department specializing in how to make wine. And there are a bunch of financiers, banks, which specialize in financing vineyards. And there are, places where they train how to become grape growers and etc. That is a cluster. Silicon Valley, that is a cluster. So what he said is, if you want to become successful, you can talk about the general economic growth, GDP and etc., but that's okay. What's really important is you need to have more clusters. Successful economies have many, many clusters. And so that I think in Korea we, do have, I think, clusters, but Korea needs more clusters than we do today to become successful. So rather than simply saying, GDP going 3%, 4%, I think we need to be really a lot more specific. What are we doing to have the Wimbledon effect? What are we doing to have more clusters? And what are we doing to really encourage co-creation? And those are the things that I'm talking about. And also, let me give you a couple of examples of how other companies are doing it. If you go to Seattle, Washington, there's a company called PACCAR, P-A-C-C-A-R, PACCAR. What they do is they make caps for interstate trucks. If you go to America, I'm sure they do it in Korea too. You have these gigantic monster trucks, and they carry everything from furniture to food to appliances, and then they go from East Coast to West Coast. And many of those so-called the intercity trucks are owned by the trucking companies. Beacons is one, United is another one, so they own them. And then these companies, they order standard trucks, and then the drivers, they have to sleep overnight along the way, but they want them to sleep in motels, not in trucks, see? And so they buy, very inexpensive cabs, that is, the way you drive. And then, but there are also independent truck drivers. What they do is usually husband and wife team. They literally drive around the country and they live in the truck, see? Okay? And then they want very fancy cab. They want air conditioning. They want TV. They want stereo music and etc. And then when they were trying to this company called PACCAR, they were, making this cabs where the driver sits. To interstate trucking companies, they could not get very high prices because they were powerful and they would dictate the price and says, this is what we want and this is what we're going to pay. They weren't making a lot of money. The PACCAR. So PACCAR, what they did was, we're not going to sell those two guys anymore. We will go to independent owners. Okay, these independent owners who are generally husband and wife team. They live in the trucks, and they want all the fancy things. So we're going to build them. We tailor-make these cabs, and that's what they do. And since they are tailor-making them, they are getting high margins. And also, when you are selling these cabs, the truck cabs, to these large companies, they didn't have the pricing power. But when you talk to these individual independent truck drivers, they've got the pricing power. They can say, well, if you want this is what's going to cost you. And they pay for it, see? They get very high margins. So what I'm saying is that, this is one example of how PACCAR has become very successful in a very difficult market. Let me give you another example. In America, there is a company called Cisco. It's not the tech company, not CISCO, but SYSCO, Cisco. If you go to restaurants and country clubs and hotels and etc., you see the Cisco trucks all over. What they do is they bring all the food, raw materials, to restaurants and hotels and etc. And the hotels would say, I want this, and then they will bring it to you, essentially, and then that's how they cook, food like they do it today. But you can imagine serving, the restaurants, the competition is very, very keen. And then trying to go to a hotel, go to a country club, go to even a small restaurant and convince them to buy your product, that's very hard, and then margin is very low. So what Cisco, they decided to do was, we are not only going to sell, food to you, but also we are going to tell you what kind of menu you should have. We're going to tell you how to manage inventories, and I'm going to tell you how to hire a chef. And so they are selling other ancillary services as well. So they are really not selling so much food, but they are selling other things. See, and again, the Cisco has become a very, very successful story. It's a very profitable company. And then, you see their trucks all over the United States because they are selling food. They are selling services. See? And then so, these are, a couple of examples. The last thing that I want to mention is, education. I think we all agree that the Korea's educational system is, very good and very strong. And Korea today is as healthy an economy as it is, primarily because of the good educational system. But now we're talking about the creative economy, and I think the creative economy is right on. In the last 50 years or so, we've been able to do very well, making things from automobiles to cell phones to ships. But the question is, what do we do in the next 50 years? And that's where the creative economy comes in. And then so again, I don't want to get into that, but to me, the creative economy is more of a longer-term issue rather than a short-term issue. But I think we are really right on because we really need to find what we are going to do over the next 50 years. And that's where the creative economy to me comes in. What I'm saying is that even though that is the right way to approach it, we are right on, but something has to change. I think part of it is education. The educational system has to change to support the creative economy. I guess I'm a very good example. When I went to high school here, we were essentially told to memorize. I was very good at memorizing things. But I was not very good at kind of reasoning. When I went to America and then competed with other, American, boys and girls at the time, I was not very good at reasoning, even though I was great at memorizing. And then so, in Korea, we do things as a group and do very well. But I think in the creative economy that we are talking about, which is important to us, we need to really emphasize individuality, creativity, the innovations. Groupthink is very important, but I think we also need to kind of the way we educate our young people in the future to go with the creative economy.
우리 시간이 더 있었으면 뭐 계속 여러 가지 더 질문을 하고 comments를 했으면 좋겠습니다. We have to end here. On behalf of our audience, let me ask you this and explain this to the audience. That is that you did mention the reshoring, and also you mentioned the mechanization. So how you can solve this the job problem, unemployment problem in the future, because the job creation effect of reshoring and particularly manufacturing sector is getting lower and lower because of mechanization. And so how you reconcile this problem on behalf of this please?
I didn't. I guess that's a good point. I didn't talk about reshoring. It's actually I do have it on my slides, but I didn't go through it because of the time constraint. But let me just spend 2 minutes talking about what's meant by reshoring. In the olden days, people from developed nations such as U.S. and Korea would go to Bangladesh and India and Mexico and says, "We have a great product, and it's been very successful here. This is good for you. You should buy it." And then, in the olden days, they did. It could be tractors, it could be cars, it could be refrigerators. And now, many people in developing nations, they are saying, hell no, we don't like it, see? And then so, what more and more companies are doing is they are going overseas and then learn from developed nations and then bring that idea back to America, back to Korea, and then create new product. And that is called reshoring, reverse, shoring. But, again, that was one thing that I didn't go through. But the chairman here is talking about, reshoring. That is, reshoring means manufacturing went to China, they are coming back to the United States, right? But because of the mechanization, we're not talking about creating a whole lot of new jobs. And, that is true. So that's why if you look at my chart on manufacturing employment in the United States, it has bottomed, it's going up, but not going up all that rapidly because the machines are doing all the work, not individuals. And then so, I don't think reshoring, per se, that will necessarily create new jobs. I think what it will do is it will prevent jobs from going overseas, as it had in the past. But in the future, I think, I don't think we should simply count on reshoring to give us more jobs. We have to do, the many things that I've mentioned, that I mentioned, such as, co-creation, the clustering, the Wimbledon effect. And these things combined, I think, will give us more jobs. And, in the United States, for example, during George Washington's days, 95% of the population made living related to food agriculture, see? And then so, again, when you compare back then and today, we've had a lot of innovations, right? See? And a lot of new jobs created. And over the next 10 years, that's what's going to happen. And then so there will be a lot of jobs in energy and environment and finance. One of the things I've said many times in the past was Korea needs Samsung in financial services. I spent much of my life in financial services, and I know Korean banks, they've done very well in Korea, but when you look at Korean banks overseas, they have not done very well. I mean, globalization for many Korean banks here is going to Koreatown in New York or LA and then opening branches. Well, that's not in and out the globalization. And then so I think we really, need Samsung in financial services to compete with JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, and then, Credit Suisse and et cetera. So, these things will take time.
예, 정말 감사합니다. 저 책 나도 아직 못 봤는데.
하나 가지십시오.
예, 이 책 하나씩 보십시오. 이게 어디서 출판했습니까?
RHK.
여기 한국말로 된 책이니까 미래의 뉴 이코노미. 지금 오늘 이야기한 거 이외에도 여기에 많은 좋은 자료들과 또 손 박사 특유의 논리가 이론이 있었기 때문에 난 이 책을 반드시 나도 지금까지 가서 한번 볼게요. 정말 지금 세계 경제를 이렇게 아주 짧은 시간에 아주 서생트하게 이렇게 서머라이즈 하기는 참 힘듭니다. 그런데 메이저 이슈들은 다 짚어졌고, 그러나 그 이슈들 가지고 더 깊이 있게 더 논의할 이런 시간은 오늘 없습니다만은 다음에 또 손 박사 종종 한국에 옵니다. 그래서 그때마다 우리 연구원에 와서 또 여러분들과 의견 나눈 그럴 기회를 갖도록 하겠습니다. 이 회의 이후에 또 여러 가지 우리 언론과 인터뷰들이 쭉 스케줄이 되어 있습니다. 그래서 여기 끝내고 내일 미국으로 떠나시죠. 예. 또 미국 가서도 활동을 많이 하시고 또 한국 자주 오시도록. 그래서 오늘 대단히 감사합니다. 네.